All right, let's open our Bibles this morning to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, verse 8. So we continue with Solomon as he looks for life in the world apart from a relationship with God in his later years of life. A few years ago, we were in Central America, and we went to a butterfly farm. I know, I was really excited as well. But it was pretty cool, actually. And one of the butterflies that we learned about and that we were able to see was this blue butterfly that's very unique. It lays its eggs, the female does, on wild thyme out in the rainforest. And when the alligator or the caterpillar is born, it eats through the tissue of the plant, and then it falls down to the ground where it does something very odd. It begins to secrete a sweet substance that is a particular interest to red ants. And so the ants come to eat this wonderful tasting substance, and when they've got good and used to it, this caterpillar does something very odd. It blows up the back of its glands and its head, and it makes it look like an ant grub. And so the ants thinking, man, this tastes good, and we can bring this home, take this caterpillar to their lair, if you will, into the nest, and there it pupates, and it eats probably 500 or 600 of these ant grubs while it waits to be developed, and then it emerges in late June, early July, and it only lives for about 3 weeks or 4 weeks before it dies. Beautiful butterfly, but the ants really are taken for a ride because they are so attracted to the taste that is secreted by this caterpillar. I thought, there's a lot of people like that. They're like this ant. They will risk life and limb and home and health and safety and life itself to gain some of life's sweet nectar, whatever that is. And it turns out to be their destruction, or it brings about their destruction. Well, that's kind of what Solomon is going to talk to us about today. He's going to talk to us about wealth. And how we approach and how we handle and what our attitude is towards the things of this world. I mean, let's face it, there are some people that money dominates their lives. It takes their energy, it takes their thought, it takes their life in many ways. They are given over to that elusive pursuit of wealth. And this is written by a guy that had more money than anyone that had ever lived. I mean, Solomon's base salary in his days, 970 BC, was $1.6 billion a year. His throne was all gold. Actually, it was ivory covered in gold. His silverware was not silverware, it was goldware. All of his soldiers that protected him had absolutely pure beaten gold shields. And so we read in 1 Kings 10 that Solomon made silver in his kingdom just as common as stones were in Jerusalem. And this guy had it all. And so it's always good to listen to somebody who's had it all and found out what that might do to you. I remember years ago being at a Billy Graham conference with pastors, and he said to us, if a person can have his attitude towards gain and wealth straightened out, you probably can straighten everything else out in your life as well. Well, this morning we're going to go from verse 8 down through verse 20. I'd like to give you 4 things that Solomon would like you and I to remember about our outlook towards wealth. They all start with P, so you can remember them maybe a little easier. But we'll start in verse 8 and verse 9 with these words: poverty is all around us. Verse 8, if you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, do not marvel at that matter. For high officials watch over high officials, and higher officials are over them. Moreover, the profit of the land is for all, and even the king is served from the field. Point 1, poverty is everywhere. If you see the oppression of the poor, if you are able to look into the world and see the violence that perversions of justice bring, Solomon's word to you and I is, don't make that something that should surprise you. Don't let that bring you to marveling. Look, that's the way the world works. That's the way things are done in the world. In fact, his description of it is that their higher authorities or those in power watch over things for their own benefit, not for yours. They don't serve you. They serve themselves in that place of power. And then there's someone even greater than they who will watch over them with the same purpose. And it kind of goes all the way up the ladder to the king. The power, base, if you will, is usually used by people to serve themselves. And the people that are the casualties are the poor, while everyone at every level of society strives to get ahead for themselves. Now that sounds pretty cynical, but it's absolutely true. And I think that if you'll look around, you'll see that that's so. Every society, in every culture, in every place in the world is run by the rich. Just the way it is, because of the sinfulness of man. The rich are usually afforded the best education. They are given the most opportunity. They are taught very clearly how to leverage their wealth. They assume leadership because of their position, and they usually rule, with few exceptions, selfishly, with the idea of getting what they need and making sure they get what they need. All you have to do in a political year is watch both sides strive, not for your benefit, but for their own. Because that's how sin works. Everyone is out to get what they want. And Solomon says, don't let this surprise you. Don't stand on the side and go, oh my goodness, look what's happened to the world. No, this is the way it has always worked. He didn't say we should forget it. He didn't say we should ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist or even approve it. But he is saying that every form of human government is so sinfully structured that man's selfishness and sin guarantees that this is the way it's going to work. More power, more corruption, more suffering, and the people at the bottom always suffer. It's true of every society. It's true at every level of society. But he says, verse 9, and I think it's interesting, that everyone from the pauper to the king are really dependent upon the sustenance of the land. In other words, when it all is said and done, we all need God's help. In terms of the land, it has to be this issue of, the rain coming so that when we have the rain, then we can have the crops and that the fruit can come from the land. But all of us are ultimately dependent upon the Lord. But look, only saints see that. You and I as Christians understand that. We wouldn't otherwise come to that conclusion. We would just look at the world like everyone else does. So look, no matter how abused you've been or how abusive you've been, we're going to all have to answer to the Lord who is in control over all. But look, don't marvel, for this is life in the world. It's just that you and I as Christians can be different from what we see there, what we view there. In fact, you've been delivered as a Christian, as a believer, from the covetousness that you find in this life. You shouldn't be living like the world does, right? That self that drives you to higher and higher places of authority to just serve yourself. You're God's people. You're told to value the eternal over the temporal, the spiritual first. You've been given the heart of Jesus to have compassion on people that have less. It's very unlike the world. Jesus said in Matthew 26, the poor you will always have with you, which is not a statement of approval, but an explanation to how the corruption of man works. There'll always be the poor. While man is in charge, there'll be suffering and inequity. The Bible is filled with injunctions to you and I as Christians to do our best to alleviate the poverty of others, to give to those who don't have, to be helpful. Not simply in terms of handing out, but in terms of leading people to Jesus. Because as David would write in Psalm 37, he said, from the time I was young until now I'm old, I've never seen the righteous forsaken or their descendants begging bread. I mean, the ultimate solution for poverty is you go to Jesus who will provide. And then you follow his ways. It's still the answer for individual life. But that doesn't mean even though we see it as something that won't go away, we're obligated to try to help, to do our part. The Proverbs 31 woman was known by the fact that she extended her hand to the poor and reached out her hands to the needy. Paul, when he was leaving Jerusalem, and he said to them, God's sending me to the Gentiles. and he wanted their approval and support. He was given the right hand of fellowship there in Acts, but then they said, there's only one thing we want of you. Don't forget the poor. And Paul said, we were more than willing to do that. In fact, he mentions that in Galatians chapter 2. So we live in a fallen world ruled by sinful men, which tells us the government of men is fallen as well. And though some forms of government might be preferred over others, all are inadequate. So look, don't marvel when you go, oh, look at the abuse, look at the inequity, look at the perversion of justice. Hey, what else do you expect? Man's in charge. Look, no matter who you elect in November, they're going to fail you. God's chosen form of government is not a democracy, although it seems to be the best man has been able to come up with. God's best form of government is a theocracy, where he calls all the shots, where he gives all the orders, where he makes all the laws. And when he comes to rule, you're going to see this is the best. Because there at the top is no corruption now. A God who is for us, not against us. If you go to the Old Testament, even in the law, God's law covered the idea of need and those that were suffering. You were told if you owned a piece of property and you were going to harvest your land, that you were only allowed by law to go through the land once. Whatever you missed, whatever was still hanging from the vine or from the tree, whatever fell on the ground or fell out of the cart you were pushing, you had to leave that there so that the poor could then go through and glean your land. That was God's provision. It wasn't a handout. It wasn't a welfare system. It was a work system. You can go to work and your dignity can be maintained. We can't erase or eradicate poverty, but we can certainly be a part of meeting the needs of those around us as a witness to who Jesus is. So when you read in verse 8, if you see it, don't ignore it. No sense in just looking and then complaining. If God has showed you that there's a need somewhere, try to meet it. Don't just react. Don't marvel. Oh my goodness, this is horrible. Get a plan. I always thought that a plan was better than a knee-jerk reaction. I know at the thrift store during the winter, we put bags together for folks that we might run into that are homeless. It's cold. We have blankets and socks and jackets and just everything that they might need just to survive. It's a start. So we encourage people at the thrift store in the winter, just go get a couple of those bags and keep them in your truck or your back of your car and be able to help somebody. Be willing to help. And notice that the words officials and kings are mentioned several times in here. Those who are the higher authorities. The good news is you live in a country where you can be involved. You can vote. I'll tell you who the loudest critic of government usually is. It's those who do nothing. So do something. Get involved. I don't believe the church has a place in politics. The church, I mean us, the pulpit. If you're looking for advice on politics, I'll give you a list of churches in the area you can go to. It won't be us. But individually, we're responsible to take the privileges that God has given to us. Go elect those who best represent the Lord. Work in their campaign. Send them money. Stand with them. But here's a pretty important principle. The poverty that we decry and the suffering and the oppression of the violent perversion of justice and righteousness, hey, that's always going to be there. Not going to eliminate that. But a believer can certainly mitigate some of those consequences. Secondly, verse 10, 11, and 12, prosperity, the opposite of poverty, will never satisfy us. Verse 10 says this, he who loves silver won't be satisfied with silver. He who loves abundance with increase, that's vanity, it's emptiness, there's nothing left over. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit does the owner have except to see them with her eyes? It's the sleep of a laboring man it is the sleep of a laboring man that's sweet, whether he eats a little or a lot. It's the abundance of the rich that won't permit him to sleep. You see, prosperity doesn't help. By the way, the Bible has a lot to say about money and investments and earnings and hard work. We have followed the principle in the last 35 years as a church that we never ask for money, we never raise money, we never tell you there's a need. We take offerings on Sunday mornings, we teach about it when we hit it. We totally believe God will provide. I don't need to be a fundraiser for Jesus. He can pay his own bills, and if he can't, then we should change God's. So, but the Bible's filled with our attitude towards, our outlook of, in fact, if you've read the Gospels at all, 1 in every 7 verses in the Gospels has money or gain either as a direct focus or as an example to teach something else, our attitude towards it. So it's something that Jesus used a lot to teach. And certainly one of the misconceptions in the world is, not for you, is that wealth can bring satisfaction. But that's absolutely wrong. When Paul wrote to Timothy there in 1 Timothy chapter 6, he said the love of money was the root of every evil. And that because of the love of money, some people have actually strayed away from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. It has done nothing but damage. Now, it isn't the money that's the issue. It's the love of it. It's the preoccupation with it. It's the desire for it. And since it's a word that speaks about your attitude, it's a word that isn't just for the rich, it's also for the poor. Because either you have it and love it, or you wish you had it and love it. It causes the same distress. Solomon says, loving, verse 10, silver will not bring you satisfaction. It's that love, though, for gain. David was extremely wealthy as a king. Wrote in Psalm 62, if riches increase, do not set your heart upon them. In other words, your relationship with wealth should be a distant one in that regard in terms of affection. That doesn't mean the Bible doesn't speak a lot about diligence, hard work. It says in all labor there's profit, but chatter leads to poverty. A slack hand becomes poor. A diligent one can make rich. A lazy man wants but has nothing, while the diligent man wants and finds riches. God would like you to work hard and to put your best foot forward and to give it all you got. There's something to be said about having ambition in life. Yet, reading the same Bible, the motive for gain should never be that. I want more. It should always be, I want to be a good example and set before the world the fact that I will do everything I can to serve the Lord and be faithful and diligent to honor Him, to be a witness for Him, so that working that way, then God can determine what you'll have or you won't have. You've done your best. And you can be satisfied with where you end up then because this is God's choice. I've been as faithful as I can be. Abraham was wealthy. 318 people just on his house staff. Imagine having 318 people at your house waiting for breakfast. Job was extremely wealthy. He lost all that he had in some real trials, but ended up with twice as much as he started with. And all of those riches in their lives were a direct blessing from God, and they used it for His glory. Joseph was the second richest guy on the planet, next to Pharaoh. He controlled the world's wealth, and yet he didn't love it, he loved God. But the world is all about loving wealth. I mean, I don't know if you watch TV, but over the years, game shows on TV have been driven by a love for wealth. So you want to be a millionaire? Well, yes, I do. Or come on, survivors, stay on the island, get $1 million. It will change your life. Oh, it might, but not necessarily for good. To the lost, money and gain is what, to a believer, Jesus should be. The love of your life, the gold of your life. Gold, not gold, but same thing. They trust in riches as their refuge and hope. And yet Solomon, the $1.5 billion a year man, is here to tell you, it ain't it. Said a couple of weeks ago in chapter 3 that God has created you with eternity in your heart. that nothing of this life that is temporarily of a goal will ever satisfy you. You'll always want a little bit more. It's the way the world works. And God made you so that you will never find satisfaction that lasts in anything other than Him. Jesus said to His disciples there in Luke 12, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things which he possesses. That's not you. And that's not life. Oh, the world might say so. And for a while it might even look that way. But not in the end. To love money or gain or wealth is to love something which can never satisfy you and can never return the favor that you showed it for all the commitment you made it to gain it. There's another misconception about wealth, verse 11, that says that wealth can solve problems. When good is increased, they increase who eat them. So what profit is that to the owner except he gets to see them with his eyes? If you will, in reality, wealth creates problems. I'll guarantee you, if you win the lottery and it goes public, it won't be but a few days that you're going to get calls from friends you never knew you had, and lost family members who are just sure you're their long-lost uncle. Not to mention the minute you start to get things, people come around and want to help you to spend that money, invest that money, watch over that money, insure that money. And people will line up to live on your gain. And pretty soon, to be wealthy, you'll be doling it out to everyone to line up to eat. And your only joy will be, look at all the money I got, but see where it's all going? Right outside the American Express door. And you spend more, and you spend more, and you pay more, and now you got a management team to watch over it, and Solomon just goes, that's not living. And it certainly doesn't solve any problems. Well, maybe it's just the peace of mind that it gives. Well, according to verse 12, it's the sleep of a laboring man that is sweet. And sometimes he doesn't get to eat a lot, sometimes just a little. And yet it is the abundance of the rich that keeps him from being able to sleep. In other words, wealth does not bring peace of mind. The more you own, the more you have to worry about. Solomon had it all. He had it all. He looks out his window and he sees a simple man who labors from 8 to 5. He punches the clock. He goes home, sleeps great, satisfied with what he's been given, while the rich are up late worrying. You may covet a rich man's lifestyle, but he might be coveting yours. So, the simple life, hard work, come home, love the kids, watch TV, sleep like a baby. And then there's that rich guy who's got investments and pursuits and lawsuits and ventures and investments and handlers and overseers and lawyers and holdings. Oh my goodness, I can't sleep. John D. Rockefeller, at 53 years old, was the first billionaire in the world. He was the only billionaire at the time. His salary during those years was $1 million a week. It's hard to spend that much money, let alone receive it. But needless to say, he loved the Lord. Devout Baptist man, he lived by what he always quoted John Wesley, and Wesley used to say, gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And he lived that life. He gave more away than anyone else really in history, few people in history. He was an amazing guy. At 86 years old, he wrote a poem. He wasn't a poet, and you'll listen, you'll know. But he wrote this: I was early taught to work as well as play. My life has been one long, happy holiday, full of work, full of play, and I dropped the worry along the way, and God gave me good every day. He died at 98 years old, having given most of his money away. He learned something. Money didn't have him. He used it for God's glory. But it can't bring peace of mind. God does that. Poverty is everywhere. Prosperity won't satisfy. Number 3, verse 13, productivity could even ruin you. Notice what it says there. There is a severe evil which I've seen under the sun. Riches kept for their owner to his own hurt. Those riches perish through misfortune, and when he begets a son, there's nothing in his hand. He came from his mother's womb naked, shall he return to go as he had come. He shall take nothing with him from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. There's also a severe evil, just exactly as he came, that's how he's going to go. What profit has he had from all of his labors in the wind? All of his days he eats in darkness. He has much sorrow and sickness and anger. Verse 13, productivity might ruin us. Look, there's this misconception that wealth brings security. Oh, I'm keeping it, man. I'm set for life. But look at what Solomon says. Here's a severe evil. An owner who keeps all of his money to himself, and it turns up hurting him in the end. The hoarding guy who can't get enough, and he doesn't realize this is extremely destructive. There's no security here. There's only misfortune waiting for him. And whether it's mischief or affliction or sadness or grief, it doesn't take long to get your money from you. A dip in the Dow, a bad investment, a turn in the housing market, collapse of a bank, a worldwide pandemic. And pretty soon you don't have enough to pass along to your children who come after you. I talked to a guy that owns a bicycle store. I thought it was very interesting. He said he's never been so busy. He said the last 3 months he has profited 1,200% a month over last year. Because no one can go everywhere. Everyone just wanted to ride a bike now. I'm just going to ride a bike around a park with a mask on. It looks great. You remember MC Hammer? That guy? Can't touch this? Made $30 million in the early 90s. Bought a $12 million house. Had a staff of 200 people. Had a 40-person entourage that would travel with him everywhere he went. And it wasn't long before his luxurious lifestyle turned up bankrupt. Or Mike Tyson, who made $400 million beating people up. Bought a mansion, filled the mansion with wild animals, got a large people party joining him, had some shady management, very expensive divorce. 2003, he files bankruptcy. He's $27 million in debt. Oh, welcome to the good life. The very pursuit of wealth that promises security can be your ruin. We should just handle it very lightly. Be careful of it. Money is a very good servant. It's a terrible taskmaster. When the stock market crashed in 1929, the inordinate amount of business executives who killed themselves left notes behind that basically said, I can't live without all of these things. I can't survive. I can't handle losing it all. There was a man in 1929 who ran into a very expensive home that had caught fire to get a very expensive painting that he wanted to save, and he burned up in his house. That's ludicrous. But that's the way life goes in this world. There was a fella there in those same 20s newspaper ads who was robbed. He had gone to get his safety deposit box out of the bank, had $750,000 in cash, a lot of money in 1929. And someone stuck him up and took it from him. And before he killed himself, he wrote this on the suicide note: everything I have in life has been taken. Well, if everything that you have in life can be taken, you don't have any life at all. Solomon adds here in verse 15 and again in verse 16 the words even a more severe. Notice in verse 13, severe, and then in verse 16, severe. There's a severe evil. What's the severe evil? That you can lose all your stuff, but that you don't realize you're going to lose it anyway. First of all, you can lose it and somehow that's your life. But then never realizing that you're going to lose it anyway. Because ultimately the reality is death is going to take you away. And the funeral of a hoarder is that his life and all of his possessions are going to be left behind. Everything he found joy in and satisfaction in, he can't take with him. There's no U-Haul behind a hearse. What do you got in the truck? Oh, that's my stuff. Yeah. Paul tells Timothy, you've brought nothing into the world. Make sure you understand you're going to carry nothing out. Once it's over, it's over. always thought it was interesting that in our dollar bill, we have on the back of it a picture on the right-hand corner of an eagle with his wings spread. And then I always remember that Proverbs 23 verse that said, verse 5, why would you set your eyes upon those things which don't exist? Riches are that way. They grow themselves wings, and like an eagle, they fly to heaven. I thought they're money. Hey, money talks, all right. It says, bye-bye. That's what it says. Gotta go. So, you won't have it for long. So why spend your life pursuing it while you're setting spiritual work aside? Finally, verse 18 and 19 and 20 are these words: priorities, spiritual priorities, can preserve us. Look what he says in verse 18. Here is what I have seen. It is good and it is fitting, finally something that's proper, for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all of his labors which he toils under the sun, all the days of his life which God gives to him. That's his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, that's God's gift. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God gives him busyness with the joy of his heart, or keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. In other words, there has to be some priorities if you're going to stand out in this world that is so caught up in the game. And the first thing he says in verse 18 is there ought to be a priority of an enjoyment. Look, God's desire, wherever you turn the Bible, is that your life would be filled with joy, that you'd find satisfaction in what God gives you to do. If your lot in life is to be a laborer, to live from paycheck to paycheck, if that's where God has put you, hey, be grateful, be thankful. Doesn't mean don't work hard or try hard, but look, if you've done all you can do and that's where the Lord has you, then you should find your joy in serving the Lord, not look for some other place or the grass that's always greener somewhere else. Be thankful that God has provided for you. Don't be always fueled with this ungrateful, dissatisfied heart. It's how the world works. Isn't the way that you and I should be living. In fact, even verse 19, if the Lord gives you riches and wealth and the opportunity to enjoy them, realize they're God's gifts to you. The joy should come from the giver, not from the gifts. Be busy serving the Lord. Make him the joy of your heart. Find contentment in serving the Lord. And that's true at whatever level you find yourself. You'll be delivered from what the world does. When Paul wrote to the Philippians, who were always the first ones to help him financially as he was on his missions tours. In fact, the Philippian church was the first church he planted in Europe, the very first one that God established. So they were always sending money after him, like, Paul, we'd like to help you out. And there were a lot of wealthy people in Philippi. But Paul, when he got one time an offering from them along the road, he wrote back to them in that Philippian letter, and he said, look, I've learned in whatever state I am just to be content. I know how to be abased or not have anything. I know how to abound. I know how to be full and how to be empty. But I've learned in every case that I can just do anything through Christ who strengthens me. But he uses the word learn twice. In other words, I've learned to be content. It doesn't come naturally. But contentment, according to Paul, is not what you have or don't have. It's who you know. If God's the one that you serve, you can be content. You might not have everything everyone else had, but you have the Lord. You have eternal life. You have a God who is for you, not against you, and promises to meet your every need. The problem is we get worldly in our outlook, and we start to complain and wish we had and wish you didn't have, and we get mad at the Lord. But you start Psalm 23, and the words there are, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not what? I shall not want. He's the shepherd. So I can rest in him. Jesus said that he has come to give us life, that much more abundantly, and I guarantee you that's not physical, nor is it material. But he's come to give us life. So let me ask you something this morning. What you have, is it enough? No, really, is it enough? And if not, what would be enough? And what would you do with it? In fact, what are you doing with what you have? And how do those wants line up? Are they endless? And what do they consist of? Do you give to those who need generously, or do you keep it all close to the vest? Do you invest in spiritual things, or are you constantly serving yourself? God wants you to enjoy what he provides and make him the joy of your life. Be busy with the joy of your heart. It's the way to go. Without covetousness, with contentment, thankful to the Lord for what he has provided, the Lord our helper and our joy. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. I'll add everything else to you. Look, if you're not involved in a church ministry because you're always going to work, if you can't make church during the week because I'm going to work, if you can't come to a baptism because I'm busy working, can't show up at a picnic, at a fellowship, at a servant place, if I'm always busy, you're too busy. And you're working yourself down the wrong way of life. I heard a comment the other day, well, actually it's been a few weeks ago, but a guy said, money is like manure. If you pile it up, it'll stink. But if you spread it out, it'll cause stuff to grow. And I like that a lot. Kind of stinky, but you'll remember it. Poverty is all around us. We're not getting rid of that, although we are in a position to be a blessing to those who don't have, because that's what God would have us to do. Prosperity will never satisfy you, so don't make that your goal. Productivity, as far as I want more and more, can be your ruin. Not that you shouldn't work diligently, but how much is enough? And priorities, putting the Lord first, enjoying him, that'll spare you from the deceitfulness of riches that devour. Solomon has a lot of wise things to say. He saw them clearly. The value of gain and honor and where we place our priorities. Had enough? Let's pray, shall we? Father, thank you this morning for your word to us. What an amazing God you are. How good you've been to us, Lord. How much you've provided. How thankful we are that you have given to us more than we need most of the time. May we be those people that adopt, Lord, these truths that we read in Solomon's words to us out of this book. May you show us where we're still bound to the flesh, bound to the world system, bound to the love of gain, love of money, and what we should be doing so that we can have victory. And even in these days where everything is so uncertain and struggle with economies seems to be real in so many small little places, and yet, God, you're still on the throne, and so we look and we depend upon you. We thank you for providing every need for us as a church, that we've not lacked, and we don't suspect that we will, because you're a good God. And we know that you're a Father who provides for his people. Look, if you're caught up in the loving gain thing, man, what a good day to let go of that. Find the joy in your Savior, in the giver of life. And whether you're here in the sanctuary or over in the fellowship hall or just at home listening, if you're home listening, I hope you'll join us quickly. Your only sacrifice will be to put on a mask to serve the one who died on the cross. I think you'll be all right. But thank the Lord for his goodness to us. How faithful he is. And may you find yourself, even in verse 20 this morning, just enjoying God's blessing, busy with the joy of your life. You've come to worship him.